Labor notes. We've just finished talking about immigration. Immigrant workers faced horrible jobs, but at least they were jobs. If you would look at your average laborer in the year 1900, on average, they're working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, for $1.50 per day, on average. So again, some of these numbers are higher, some of them will be lower, but this is your average. If you were a woman or a kid, you don't make $1.50 a day, you're making less. Female laborers. Half of female laborers in 1910 make less than $6 a week. Think about that. You're working on average 6 days a week and you're making less than $6 a week. That's not even $1 a day. That means every penny you make, you had to pinch every penny. Normal desires to do fun stuff are put away because you are barely meeting your basic necessities. And if you find a way to increase your income by working faster or harder, typically they'd find a way to take that away from you as well. There was an example where a lady was sewing buttonholes on shirts, and she got paid so much per buttonhole. And the employer realized that as fast as she worked, she was good at it, she could make almost $25 a week. The employer said that's too much for a girl and cut her pay. So now she had to work just as hard just to make barely enough. And when there was a protest, she was fired. Child laborers. Some critics actually referred to it as child slavery. Very few child laborers had ever been to school, and families basically said children had to work for the family or the family starved. There's a story of one child that was 9 years old that was working in a mine because his father had died and owed money to the mine for rent. So the 9-year-old had to take over for the father who had died. You're going to start seeing a huge push for labor laws. Groups wanted to work to try and stop the child labor, to try to stop the unfair women's labor. Progressives pushed for labor laws. Progressives sought to solve problems of urbanization and industrialization. So progressives obviously are pushing for labor laws. So are union activists pushing for labor laws. That brings us to Florence Kelley. Florence Kelley is an example of somebody who worked for this cause. She actually, in 1893, gets Illinois to start passing some labor laws, stopping child labor and limiting the number of hours that you could force women to work. Now, most children that work in agriculture, but it was the factory working kids that had the worst conditions. In 1910, there were estimated to be 2 million children working in factories, and the stories were horrendous. I mean, splashing water in children's faces to keep them awake, girls working 16 hours a day, orphans being sent to factories to work, so that way there was nobody at home to complain. And you saw a lot of injuries for children because of their small size, having to fix machines or unjam something, or working in areas that just weren't safe for them. The National Child Labor Committee is going to be organized by Florence Kelley in 1904. And they wanted to persuade state legislatures to pass laws against child labor. And by 1912, 39 states had passed child labor laws. Various kinds of laws, some saying older kids can work but only 8 to 10 hours a day, some saying kids can't work after dark. Some said kids can't work in what they call dangerous occupations. Some saying kids had to be able to read in order to work, at least guaranteeing them some level of schooling. Congress passes the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act in 1916. The president at the time was Woodrow Wilson, and he backs it, he signs it. And it's going to outlaw the sale of products made with child labor. But in 1918, the Supreme Court is going to rule this law unconstitutional, saying it's not worded right. It restricts commerce when what it needs to do is prohibit child labor. It's restricting the sale of something that otherwise you could sell. Here's the thing. You can make whatever laws you want. But if they aren't being enforced, people aren't going to follow them. Businesses kept hiring kids. They said their success depended on that cheap child labor. You're going to have a little different fight about then. People start saying, hey, if we pay families higher wages, then maybe the kids won't have to work. Look at these stats here. In 1910, the number of people employed, 30 million men, 17.5 million women have jobs. But a third of those people lived at the poverty level. They're working full-time, if not more than full-time, but they still lived at the poverty level. So people start saying there needs to be some sort of minimum wage. The first state to pass a minimum wage law was Massachusetts, but it was only in effect in Massachusetts. Nationally, there wasn't a minimum wage until 1938.